Okay. Good morning, Rabbi. Great to see everyone, and hope everyone had a wonderful Pesach, a meaningful Pesach, and hope that next year we're all celebrating it together in our homeland. I believe it's very possible. So the theme or the topic of today's, as I was thinking about what to discuss, was Passover is over, or is it? I'd like to spend the next 13, 14 minutes exploring what happens after Passover, after Pesach. And I think I'd like to start it with a story. There was a really interesting vignette that I came across a little while ago that se- several decades ago when the Russian influx into Israel was taking place. So Rabbi Lau, Rabbi Meir Lau, the previous chief rabbi, at that time he was actually the Rav in Tel Aviv. And he was part of that based in that, court system that dealt with the immigrants and conversions and stuff like that. And he met this 42-year-old doctor. His name was George, actually. And George was coming to say that he was Jewish. He brought witnesses with him that could attest to it. And Rabbi Lau asked one of the witnesses, like, what's the story? So he explained, he said, actually, I know this person from the old country. His parents are actually doctors. And I want to tell you a story. He says his mother, who was the head of the pediatric department in one of the hospitals in Russia, was actually, you're not going to like this part, but back then and in Russia, I don't know how things operated. She was also a chain smoker. Somehow, when I heard pediatric department and chain smoker, I think like we're like that's not a good combination. But well, putting that aside, that was the reality. And she was this chain smoker that would smoke literally 2, 3 packs a day. However, at the end of each day, she would take one cigarette and put that cigarette in a box and store it away in a box. And then what would happen is just after Purim, this man said, this woman would come to me with 350, 60 some odd cigarettes and trade it for me for flour so that she can make matzahs for Pesach. Rabbi Lau was extremely overtaken by that story. And he asked George, he says, is your mother still alive? He said, yes. He says, can I speak to her? He said, we can try. He calls his mother while they're sitting down in this base bin and says, I just heard this story. He said, listen, I'll tell you the truth. I don't know whether or not the matzahs were kosher matzahs or not, whether you did it in the 18 minutes with enough this, but I will tell you the following, that probably your matzahs were the most valuable, precious matzahs that all of the Jewish people had, and that gave HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave God the most nachas, the most joy and pride in. And he said, most Jews, they celebrate Pesach for 1 day, 2 days, 7 days, 8 days. He says, but you are one of the only people I ever met that celebrated and had Pesach on their mind 365 days of the year. And so he said, this is no doubt that George is a Jewish child. There's no need for conversion. And in fact, I'd like to suggest that his name is no longer George, but it should be Gershon, which I think is the Hebrew name of what George would be. George's mother was beyond herself. She was in tears. And she said, Rabbi, you just reminded me. This is what? I remember when my husband named our child at his bris 42 years ago. We gave him the name Gershon and had never used it since that day. And when I heard that story, there's so many different pieces that started to fire off in my mind. The story of what we'd call Mesirut Nefesh, of really giving one's, life, In Russia, forget about the fact of a chain smoker not having one more cigarette and putting that aside every single day. But just a person who says, you know what, everything I'm going to put aside in order to be able to do that one mitzvah in a regime where that that's not really allowed. And it's not like we're so blessed in Toronto, go up and down Bathurst Street. Yes, we complain it costs $50 to buy a matzah, but it's free for us to take without any fear of oppression. And for a person to live in such a space and a way that every single day they found a way to connect to something, even though they knew it was going to be long down the road for that to happen. It, to me, makes me feel almost, inadequate with how I celebrate my Pesach, both in terms of maybe some of the complaining that I had leading up to it, but more importantly, once it's over and you sort of wash your hands and move on, I kept thinking to myself that this woman, the day after Pesach was over, that next morning, she put a cigarette away for the following Pesach, which is such an unbelievable message. Hopefully, not for us as chain smokers, but for us as what it means when we exit Pesach and Passover. There's an interesting idea that if you look in some of the sitters that people might use, I know it's in my Art Scroll sitter, after the morning service, there's 6 different things. They're called the Sheish Zechiros, the 6 memories. And the idea being that there's 6 different things that every single day a Jew reminds themselves of. And one of them is Zechiros Yetzias Mitzrayim, is remembering that we got out of Egypt, right? That I almost view it sometimes like if you have a good health plan, then you go to the dentist every year, if not twice a year. But not do you only go to the dentist, let's say every year, you brush every day, right? If you just relied on your brushing, then when you got to the dentist, there'd probably be root canals, right? And you never went to the dentist, then probably over time, it would slowly get a little worse, 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 worse without you even realizing. If you just went to the dentist and never brushed, right, you'd be going to the dentist each year to get teeth pulled. But there's this big cleaning that happens, right? And this big awakening of the importance of caring about my teeth. And then there's the constant reminder every day, pay attention to them. A little bit of home care will go a long way for the long run. And I think that that is an analogy to how we view this concept of the mitzvah on Passover, to really dig in deep and go through the fluoride treatment and the cleaning and the scaling and everything that's there. And then the rest of the year, we remember, what does it mean? Freedom. How do I express my freedom? And all the messages that some we spoke about before, others which we talk about on the podcast, other ones which came around your table. But how do we sort of keep that going? Last night I had a big privilege. I spoke to a group of women on a Zoom at 9 o'clock. One of them has a son who's a soldier in the IDF. She's American. He was home for Passover, as it turns out. He was away for about 100 days. And I asked this chevra, I said, like, how did this thing start? They said, you know what, after October 7th, we got together, a few of us, and said, let's go on Zoom and we'll say some Tehillim, we'll say some Psalms. And she said it grew a little bit. And then more people. Now people from across North America plug into this. And she says, every day I'm like, every day? She says, yeah, except for Shabbat or whatever. I'm like, you've been doing this every day? And there's something about that just made me feel so aspirational in terms of how to continue doing something, and not just episodically, but it's always on our mind, on a pilot light. Again, they're operating, they're going to work, they're doing whatever, but they happen to end their day at 9 o'clock at night with, some shmuel like me getting on to say a few words and then reciting 2 of these prakim of Tehillim. Sure, they'll still go to the community events and whatnot, but there's something about the idea of once something is over, it's not over. It actually just gives us greater rigor and vigor to move forward with that message rather than moving it on the other side. I saw a really interesting commentary a little while ago. When I say a little while ago, probably a couple of years ago, in a sefer, in a book called Lekach Ulibub, where we know the famous questions of Ma Nishtana, how we start the night. He says he has a slightly different version, a girsa it's called, a slightly different version of what he thought that blessing really was, or what that question really was. Typically, we understand it as Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelos. Oh, why didn't anybody tell me my camera's off? What was up with that? Huh. Right? Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelos. He says, why is this night different than all the other nights? So, and we understand it's different because we eat flatbread, we don't eat pizza, right? We eat, bitter herbs, not a tossed salad. So we get it. That question is, why is this night different than all the other nights? He says, no. He says, the question really is, Manishtana al yedei halayla hazeh. What will change as a result of this night? Not what is different about this night, but going through this night, what will be different moving forward afterwards? Right? Pesach is not about Pesach. Pesach is about being able to go ahead and go through a cycle of time at an energy, a reminder, a history, a part of our essence, which over time sometimes gets softened, or even as we grow, has more opportunity to mine it on a level. The way that a 49-year-old can understand the messages, the depth, the relevance of Pesach, right, is very different than the way a 50-year-old with another year of experience, especially after a year like this. The way we understood Pesach, when we would sing the songs of, Bihisha Amda, in every generation, they try to destroy us, but in every generation, God comes to save us somehow. You couldn't read the Seder this year and have that mean the same thing it meant to you last year. It's impossible unless you're not invested in paying attention to it. And therefore, I think that while Pesach is over, it's not. It's with us. We take those things with us. It's part of the journey. So when they left Egypt, and the first Pesach was celebrated in Egypt, right? That was the first time they had matzah. That was the first time they had their korban Pesach, their Pesach sacrifice. That's the first time they ate their everything the first time. And then they got out of Egypt. So God didn't say, you're out of Egypt, leave that in the past. He says, take that with you. Take that reminder with you. Tell your kids about it. I know that you're out and it's over and you're moving on, but Jews don't move on, they move up. And when you move up, it means you take everything that you experience and it builds you to higher levels that are there. And therefore, I think it's, we're all exhausted from a long Passover and changing over the dishes and doing the major shop to get the chametz back in. But like Shabbos is a great sort of pause again that we get. And maybe there's an opportunity around our tables with ourselves to just be like, Manishtana al yedei halayla hazeh. What has changed as a result of this Passover that in some way is going to illuminate greater light, greater freedom, greater expression, and greater me, greater Jewish me is a result of that as well. And if we think about it, right, we've shared before that in many ways, we don't know what's going to be happening tomorrow. I shared with a few people an insight that I had, not really an insight, just a feeling. I said, imagine if you were in the generation right before the year before they got out of Egypt. I shared this yesterday. I had the privilege of speaking at downtown at a wonderful group of Jewish professionals in an organization, a really special group that's come together ever since October 7th, special people. And I said to them, as I was thinking, that imagine if you were in the generation right before they got out of Egypt, the year before. So you've been enslaved for 210 years, 209 years. And your kids and your grandkids, your great, everybody's lived in slave mentality, beyond torture that we can imagine just from the stories that we read. And if you read more of the midrashim and part of the oral tradition of what happened to our people, like the brutality which we cannot even begin. The starting point is throwing every male into the water. Imagine you're born in that society and it's year 209. What would you think as a Jew? You think this is hopeless. We're finished. We're gone. This is our existence forever. But if you and I could tell that person, wait, in the year 210, the whole thing's going to change, right? You're living not at the worst time of history. You're living on the precipice of the best moment in Jewish history. You just have to lean in a little bit more, sacrifice a little bit more, right? Call out a little bit more. And then next year, it could be a totally different reality. That was the reality with the generation the year before they got out of Egypt. And that's part of what we take with us, that strengthening in belief when you feel that it's all lost, that wait, it's just on the other side of the door that we have the opportunity to be able to see that the whole game can change. So hopefully as we move out of this Pesach, it shouldn't be one, back into the grind. And listen, on the way home from speaking down at this organization, I passed by the U of T campus, and I'm sure we all listened to the news of what happened there. And they have their encampment. And I'm not a big Instagram person, but I took a picture and posted the song Vihisha Amdan there. We've seen this before, and we'll get through this like we get through everything else before. But we should never walk away from a Passover back into this thing feeling like, but look at it. We should have the greatest of hope that everything can change just on that other side of the door. And that's not just a fake belief. That's Jewish history. We've seen it generation and generation again, and we should merit to be able to see it in our generation, because we will. Just a question of how soon it will be. But we will see it, and it'll be because of the efforts of this chevra on this call and everything else that the Jewish people are doing to dig in deep. So wishing everyone a wonderful first Shabbos. Enjoy your challah, which we've haven't had for a whole 9-10 days. So if you don't have, you can come over. We're making a fresh batch over here. Happy to share some. And please God, we should never ever sing the song L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, because next year we'll just be in Jerusalem, so we won't have to worry about that anymore. Okay, I'm going to turn off the recording. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos. If you have any questions, please feel free. Sorry about the initial thing with the video camera.
Rabbi Lipner, I just